Right. Suppression of experimental results by theoretical bias. Theorists are now believing theory over experiment. Where do we get this from? Answer: from Einstein, of course. So, physics community is putting too much confidence in theory over experimental results, and I presume there is differences of opinion in this, but there is opinion by theorists that theory is more important over experimental results, and this sort of point of view has come via Einstein. Right. I'm going to refer to a video lecture by Murray Gell-Mann, and first going to look at his bio at that site. Here we go. This is Wikipedia. Wikipedia gives you a rough idea. Murray Gell-Mann, there's a picture of him here, and he was he's an American physicist who received the 1969 Nobel Prize in Physics for his work on the theory of elementary particles. And so it's work on theory, really. So he's getting this Nobel Prize work for theory. So basically he must be a theorist as opposed to an experimental physicist, mainly working with sort of theory and maths probably. So he's developed his theory and he's got his Nobel Prize for it. So this is the talk he's got. Murray Gell-Mann on beauty and truth in physics. So we go through his little talk. Hopefully I got the sound right. Here we go.
Thank you for putting up these pictures of my colleagues over here.
So he's making a little joke that these are his colleagues. That's Gell-Mann there, and there's Einstein, and there's Newton. And so it's a little joke that that's his colleagues.
Pictures of my colleagues over here. We'll be talking about them. Now, I'm going to try an experiment. I don't do experiments normally. I'm a theorist, but I'm going to see what happens if I press this button. Sure enough. Okay. I used to work in this field of elementary particles. What happens to matter if you chop it up very fine? What is it made of? And the laws of these particles are valid throughout the universe, and they're very much connected with the history of the universe. So we know a lot about four forces. There must be a lot more, but those are at very, very small distances, and we haven't really interacted with them very much yet. The main thing I want to talk about is this, that we have this remarkable experience in this field of fundamental physics that beauty is a very successful criterion for choosing the right theory. Why on earth could that be so? Well, here's an example from my own experience. It's fairly dramatic, actually, to have this happen. 3 or 4 of us in 1957 put forward a partially complete theory of one of these forces, this weak force. And it was in disagreement with seven, count them, 7 experiments. Experiments were all wrong. And we published before knowing that, because we figured it was so beautiful, it's got to be right. And the experiments had to be wrong, and they were. Now, our friend over there, Albert Einstein, used to pay very little attention when people said, you know, there's a man with an experiment that seems to disagree with special relativity, D.C. Miller. What about that? And he would say, oh, that'll go away. Now, why does stuff like that work? That's the question.
So, this is the theoretical physicists, and they are biased in favour of theory over experiment. and you've got other people, say I think Feynman, and he's got the bias that experiment is more important than theory. But what I'm pointing out here, that you've got this tradition coming from Einstein, from people who believe in Einstein, that theory is more important than experiment. So if I just go over that little bit again.
Used to pay very little attention when people got to be right. And the experiments had to be wrong, and they were. Now, our friend over there, Albert Einstein, used to pay very little attention when people said, you know, there's a man with an experiment that seems to disagree with special relativity, D.C. Miller. What about that? And he would say, oh, that'll go away. Now, why does stuff like that work?
So he believes that stuff like that works. So that was Einstein's sort of attitude to experiment. He wasn't really concerned with experiment. Einstein was more interested in theory, and he believed the theory over experiment. So did it really go away? No, it didn't. The experimental results didn't go away. The theorists who believe in Einstein may laugh about it, but those experiments don't go away. So we go back to here. So I think I mentioned here his video talk was there, and now I'm going to talk about what Professor Cahill says at that site here. There we go. This is Professor Cahill, Associate Professor Reg Cahill from Flinders University in Australia, is trying to demonstrate that Einstein's wrong. If I sort of make it bigger. Big as it goes. There we go. He is well aware that his activities will not make him popular with the establishment of physics. Indeed, he believes that other experiments that produce data that conflicts with Einstein's theories have been deliberately ignored, in some cases suppressed. So that's his point of view, and he's looked very deeply into these experiments which are supposed to support Einstein, and he's saying no, they don't support Einstein, but he's finding his results are not very popular with the establishment. I've got a bit of his talk here. This is a recent talk with him. Unfortunately, I don't think the sound's very clear, so I'm going to try playing it and see what we get.
In fact, they're not sacking me until they're about to depart, so I'll just hold your breath and I'll go. But I discovered, so I'm a theoretical physicist basically. Recently I've been doing experiments because the experimentalists do not dare do, because they would lose their jobs. And so I'm doing both jobs at the moment, being a theoretical physicist and an experimentalist. And so I'm going to tell you about just some of the experimental data that's relevant to this whole business of the fundamentals of physics. Because basically physics went wrong 105 years ago. In fact, a bit earlier than that, as you'll see. But in terms of theory, it went wrong in 1985 in a massive way. And physics has never recovered from a huge mistake that happened in 1985. You know what I'm talking about. You know how popular I am now in physics. I'm an untouchable physics in Australia. All my old colleagues don't want to know. Don't talk about Cahill or what he does. It's just impossible. But I'll show you the data. Because the data is what keeps physics honest. That's why most of the stuff is suppressed. You cannot publish it in major journals because it contradicts the belief system of mainstream physics. So if you want to please have a check.
So I hope you've gathered all of that. The sound, sorry, was not that clear. I'm hoping that I might get a better copy of this talk, but what he's pointing out that mainstream physics has gone wrong, and I think he's referring to when Einstein sort of like became the super genius hero from 1905. I think that's what he's putting down the date as, when physics went wrong. And so what he's doing is he's looking at the data from these experiments and finding out that Einstein is wrong. And he's finding out that the establishment doesn't really like to know that. They're not really that keen to publish results like that, so he's having a bit of trouble there. So that's his fight he's involved in. So this is what the Einstein has done to us. If we go back to this Marie Gel man, this person is more confident in theory over experiment, and that is a biased, prejudiced point of view. And where do we get that from? We get it from Einstein. And when it comes to experiment in conflict with what Einstein wants to believe, it's suddenly a joke, and they laugh about it, and they want to ignore that. So if we go back to the little joke they have, trying to get it back at the beginning.
The universe, and they're very much connected with the history of the universe. We know a lot about four forces. There must be a lot more, but those are at very, very small distances, and we haven't really interacted with them very much yet. The main thing I want to talk about is this, that we have this remarkable experience in this field of fundamental physics that beauty is a very successful criterion for choosing the right theory. Why on earth could that be so? Well, here's an example from my own experience. It's fairly dramatic, actually, to have this happen. 3 or 4 of us in 1957 put forward a partially complete theory of one of these forces, this weak force. And it was in disagreement with seven, count them, 7 experiments. Experiments were all wrong. And we published before knowing that, because we figured it was so beautiful, it's got to be right. And the experiments had to be wrong, and they were. Now, our friend over there, Albert Einstein, used to pay very little attention when people said, you know, there's a man with an experiment that seems to disagree with special relativity, D.C. Miller. What about that? And he would say, oh, that'll go away.
So,
now, why does stuff like that?
So he believes stuff like that works. So when Einstein is informed there's an experiment that disagrees with his special relativity, then it all just turns out to be a joke for him. And that is unfortunately the situation with people from this point of view of hero worshipping Einstein. They believe that theory is more important than experiment. So if you say this experiment disagrees with your theory, it's just a joke to them. I mean, when this gel man thinks, well, there's 7 experiments that disagreed with me, and later they found out they were wrong, well, how do you suddenly get that conclusion? I think they're just biased opinion, probably. It's just what it is. It's biased, prejudiced opinion from people with a theory, and these are the mainstream theorists, theoretical people. They're not really wanting to pay attention to experiments when they're disagreeing with what they want to believe in. And so what do they refer to? Oh, it's the beauty of their theory. Their theory is so beautiful that they're going to believe it regardless of what their experiments say. So when you get to people like Reg Cadhill, we go back to him. There, Reg Cadhill, or up here, I think I've got a photograph of him. There. So when you got things like that, when you got experiments that are disagreeing with what the Einstein believers want to believe, then that's not going to get published. They're just trying to stop that. People like this have a fight on their hands to get experimental results into journals when they conflict with what these Einstein believers want to believe. So if we go down here, so we can come to my conclusion, it's all just a joke. Theorists who believe in Einstein think they know better than the experimental results. Every now and again there is some report of Einstein wrong in some experiment, but the Einstein believers just dismiss that. and then they try to suppress what's written in science journals. It is just a biased point of view. Theorists are now believing theory over experiment. And where do you get that from? Answer from Einstein, of course. So this is how deep the corruption of science is. Einstein being proclaimed a mega super genius, believing in his theory more than experiment, then he's just going to be people following his way of doing things. They're just going to ignore experiment. And they're going to suppress experiments which don't agree with what they consider beauty. That is how bad things are now in modern physics. They're not open to the truth anymore. They just want their prejudices confirmed in mainstream physics, and you're going to get the truth suppressed from being published in these science journals. And that's what we find in the dissident movement. And people who have put a lot of faith and confidence in what Einstein says, they end up getting their Nobel Prizes. For his work on the theory of elementary particles, he gets a Nobel Prize in Physics. And any experiment that's sort of disagreeing with him, they sort of decide not to believe it. And that's the way that Einstein has now set up modern physics. It's all a joke. We go back to Brian Wallace. Dr. Brian Wallace, the farce of physics. He was trying to get results published in the science journals which were unpopular with the Einstein believers, and he found that they were blocking it. When experiment disagrees with Einstein, the Einstein believers try to block it. And on the main page, Dr. Brian Wallace, the American physicist, analysed results of Venus radar location in 1960, uniquely refusing SRT, which is special relativity theory. During the third of the century, he was fighting with fraud of relativist mafia, and that is the people, that is the Einstein believers. The Einstein believers have a stranglehold on mainstream physics, and when you want to publish something which does not agree with what these people want to believe, then they're going to try to stop you getting published. And in the case of Dr. Brian Wallace, in April 1997, after long and heavy diseases, he died. He has presented for the people his great labour, Farce of Physics, where he has analysed the main mechanism of fraud used by relativists, and that is the believers in Einstein. Relativists are the people who believe in Einstein, and they're the ones who have the stranglehold on modern physics. What they want to believe is now a sort of dogma in mainstream physics. They try to suppress any dissent. The results which could pile up and say Einstein is wrong, well, they don't want that published in the science journals. Theorists, that is the people who are believing in Einstein, are believing theory over experiment. And they get that from Einstein, of course. It is all now, physics is all just a joke for what these people have done. Thank you.